Russell. Should be a good discussion. Thank you.
All right. Just a quick, I'm Ben Steelman with the Star News. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. Our speaker tonight earned a PhD in American Studies from the University of Hawaii, a Master of Science in Urban Studies from Georgia State University, and an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. She has taught at the college level at University of North Carolina, Pembroke, Barton College, and in the Graduate Liberal Studies program at UNCW. She was a former entertainment editor of the Raw News and Observer, where she was a contemporary of Florence King. She was former arts director for the city of Raleigh. Her multiple books include Seabiscuit, Wild Pony of the Outer Banks, White's Elite Sketches, Carolina Yacht Club Chronicles, Portraits of Faith, which he co-wrote with the late Marjorie McGivern, Wilmington and Pictorial History, and most recently, The Wayward Girls of Samarkand. She's also the author of a number of plays, including No More Sorrow to Arise, please excuse me, which was an 1898 presentation. She's a Wilmington native and a Rights for Beach institution. Please welcome Dr. Anne Russell.
Thank you for not saying I belong in an institution.
No, well, we're talking about your novel, Tropical Depression. How did this thing get started?
I have written, as you know, a whole lot of nonfiction of various forms, and also poetry and plays. But I never really attempted fiction. And I thought, well, I think I'm going to try that. And I love going to school. And so I signed up for the MFA in Creative Writing at UNCW when it was first getting started. It's turned into a fantastic program. They're turning out way too many good writers, as a matter of fact. There's too much competition. And I chose a novel for my project, and it was Tropical Depression. And I worked with Mike Wentworth, Clyde Edgerton, Wendy Brenner on my committee, and I pretty much got it together. But I didn't approach publishing it because I realized it somehow wasn't quite right. And so I put it aside, went on to other projects, and then a couple of years ago, it takes a long time to write this stuff, I completely rewrote it. And that's how it came into being.
Yeah. Well, basically it is set at a, shall we say, semi-exclusive yacht club in a small, upscale, southeastern beach town. The protagonist is Dan McInnes. He is the Commodore, quote unquote, of the yacht club, a retired judge, and basically a pillar of the local community who is sort of going through a winter of his discontent when he encounters Wyndham Dubeck, who is this rather free spirit investigative journalist from California who comes down and runs afoul of the yacht club management for various peccadillos, and one thing leads to another. Leave that to the imagination.
He is now.
Yes. Well, one thing I noticed is you named all your chapters or sections after colors. What was going on there?
I'm so glad you asked, because I would like to explain that structure and then call your attention to one other thing that's important to me. If you've been to the beach, not lately because it's rained every day now, the past month, but if you go to the beach, you see on the lifeguard stands a flag. And the flag is different colors depending on the weather. And you have blue, and you have green and blue and red, and you have black, and they indicate the conditions of the ocean. And so I decided to structure the book by sections using those colors. And when he and the California gal began to heat up a little bit, a red flag happens to be out there. And then when the the Hurricane Mariah is about upon them, you get the black flag with the red center. So that's why I did that. And let me mention one other thing, if that's okay. Because I love this part of this poem by Liesl Mueller. And it's called Monet Refuses the Operation. And it really is the theme of my novel.
This is Monet, the Impressionist painter,
Right.
who had terrible cataracts late in life,
Right.
but didn't get operated on.
Exactly, and that made the difference in his work being so wonderful. If he could see clearly, he would never have been able to do the impressionistic stuff he did. So his writing, there's an advantage in that. She says, I will tell you, it has taken me all my life to learn that the line I call the horizon does not exist. And sky and water, so long apart, are the same state of being. I will not return to a universe of objects that don't know each other. The world is flux, and light becomes what it touches. And that is what occurs in this novel. Dan McGinnis begins to come into the light in his late age and begins to become what it touches. And the opening mentions, and I only pick out, I think, one line here. Here we go on the first page. He's fishing, doing some early fall fishing. And he says, it was a perfect day. White triangles moved separately against the horizon, and a freighter disappeared over the edge of the world. As a boy, he feared the curved demarcation between sky and sea, imagining broken ships crushed in the abyss beyond the limits of his visual universe. In time, he learned the optical illusion, but fear stayed with him. He trusted what he could see and preferred not to test the hidden world. And so he begins to test the hidden world, and light becomes what it touches.
Well, you said the story sort of evolved on you over a multi-year process. Talk a little bit about how it changed.
One interesting thing happened. Come on, you writers, I'm sure you've experienced this. Let me see how many writers are in. Tell the truth. Come on, Ben, you're a writer. Come on. Yeah, look at it. I know these closet writer people. You start writing and you think you know where you're going and you think you've got it all nailed down. And then all of a sudden, something happens that you hadn't planned on. It gathers its own steam. It makes its own trajectory, and some of the characters become not who you intended them to be, right? So one of the characters in the book, and I will specify who, she is Dan's longtime wife, Nora. And when I began this novel, I didn't like her. I had a bias. Because Nora's a good old girl, and she's all the proper things that I was supposed to be but never could manage.
She aged out of the junior league.
Yes, yes. And in the DAR and the colonial days.
Well, you don't age out of those.
No, that's true. That's true. But junior league, you can go for a long time. And at a certain point, while Dan is sort of beginning to have a rather wild time, he and Nora had issues. Have anybody ever been in a long-term marriage here?
Yeah.
You get a few issues, don't you? Yeah. And so he and his wife have one very large issue that's never been resolved because it's like the elephant in the room. You don't want to go there with it. And this has had them sort of diverge. They live under the same roof, and to the other people it looks like, ooh, we have a perfect marriage. But the truth is they really don't. And so he is sort of gets to know California girl, and Nora surprises him. She's not quite the stuffy old gal he thought she was. And there's a scene in here, and it's embarrassing when you have children and grandchildren, you write about sex, because your kids think, how did you know that? And you begin to reveal yourself. So,
The kids call that TMI. Too much information.
yes. And so there's a scene in here where he happens upon Nora unexpectedly and is quite shocked by what he finds.
Okay, and this may be blindingly obvious, but talk about how you worked in the symbolism of the hurricane and all this.
And you know, I knew when I started this novel, even in the MFA program, it's cliche. You know, how many novels have been written about hurricanes coming? It's a natural, because you have that natural kind of thing happening. But mine had to be that way. It had to be a hurricane. I've been through many of them in Wilmington, including Hazel. I've been old, yes. I was a dear child. But, and I happen to like hurricanes. I think, because I don't own a big boat, and I don't have a house on the water, and so I can kind of sit back and enjoy watching other people. Anyway, I kind of like them, and so and it's rather appropriate for the weather we've been having this summer. And so I call my hurricane Mariah. And as you know, because you live here, you get the foretelling of the hurricane. You have what seems to be perfect weather, and then you begin to get this ominous sort of thing that's forming.
That's called Jim Cantori.
Yep. And then you begin to prepare a bit, but you're not sure what it's going to do. And then it either says, oh, the heck with you, and go somewhere else, or it hits. And so that is woven through the story.
Man, I think we've been talking enough a minute. Does anyone have any questions for Anne?
Well, you're such a good storyteller in person as well as on paper. I'm wondering, have any of your plays been produced here in Wilmington?
I did not plant her in the audience. And you know, thank you very much, because the truth is, and Ben may know this, and John knows this, John Bonnet's right there, who's a big theater guy. He has directed a couple of plays I've been in and produced one or two, and one was in New York, not on Broadway, it was off.
Okay.
But John is the producer and director for that.
Who's John?
John, right there, John Bonnets. He's a consummate theater guy. If I had the money to do what I like to do most, I'd write plays and plays and plays and plays. I love theater. And I love writing plays. Writing a play to me is the most difficult writing you're going to do. It's much easier to write a novel, because a play, you have to keep it going every step of the way. You've got these characters, you can't put one to bed for the night. You have to be sure everyone's accounted for, the dialogue has to be crisp. It's a huge challenge, but I just love writing plays. And I have had my first play produced here by Marjorie McGivern, called The Porch. And it's still my most popular play, and I've had 12 produced so far. And that The Porch is the one that John Bonnets took to New York.
Oh.
And it went over well with the Yankees, didn't it? And it's set in Wilmington on 3rd Street. next to St. James Church. And it's very autobiographical about my family, my grandparents, and so on. And so I progressed with plays, and I've had, the 1898 play done at Thayen Hall, No More Sorrow to Arise, which was a commissioned play. Dickens on the Rocks with a Twist was also done on main stage, Thayen. And I did my most autobiographical play, which it was hard for me to do because it dealt with a very painful thing in my own life, and you feel exposed, you know, you begin to, and it's called The Coldest Night in Georgia, and several of our local actors were in it, and they did an incredible job. Then I think that's really my best play.
Are they published?
No, they aren't.
I'd love to read some of them.
Well, by God, will just,
Okay.
in my spare time, make sure that they're available to you. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate that.
We can exchange
Yeah.
addresses later on.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about what's involved in shifting gears from stage drama to fiction and vice versa.
Okay, how many of you have done both? It's different. You know, writing a play and writing fiction, one is to be read with the eyes, and the other is to be heard and seen. And you have to be aware. I like writing plays, maybe because I'm lazy. In a novel, you have to say, it was a dark and stormy night, and they were sitting on the veranda, and you have to give all that detail. With a play, you put veranda, storm, and then you start with your dialogue, and your people start talking. And if you grow up in a Southern family, which is highly verbal, you get a lot of material before TV. When what you did to entertain yourselves after supper was you went out to get no air conditioning, you went out on the porch, give me air, and you sat out there and you talked to each other. And you really created your own dramas. And so I was a child, I was the first grandchild, and I would be, the grown-ups would be going, and they would be quarreling with each other and laughing, and my grandfather would have imbibed a bit too much, and he would be doing his thing, and my grandmother would be getting upset with him. And I would be sitting there in a corner, hearing all this stuff. So I'm real good at dialogue. And that's what a play really is dialogue. I mean, the set makes a difference, the costumes make a difference, the light, but it's the dialogue. Right, John?
Right.
Now, when did you first realize you wanted to write?
Well, Ben's interviewed enough writers to know that you're just born like that. You don't get a choice. You sort of, it's like a curse, it's a gift and a curse. And if you're a writer, you gotta write. And I discovered I gotta write when I read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn at age 7. My parents let me read that book, that grown-up book. And I just fell in love with writing, and I thought, oh my God, this writer created a whole world, you know, in words. It's just, oh, if I could only do that, I want to do that. And I read and read and read, and if you're going to be a good writer, you have to read, read, read. And so my first poem, and most writers start with a poem, we start with poetry, was when I was in 6th grade, and I wrote a Christmas card, a handwritten Christmas card to all my relatives, and I still have one of them. My grandmother saved it, unfortunately. It is the worst poem that you have ever read, and I won't even quote it. but I thought it was just wonderful. So I then went from that to winning the Scribblers Club Poetry First Prize in New Hanover High School, my sophomore year. And then I found out I won it because nobody else entered. Because in high school, only a nerd wants to admit they write poetry. And then I found out, and I won $5, which back then was, like $500 today. And so I thought, ooh, you can get money from writing. Woo, I like this. So I started writing journalism for money. Not a lot of money. And one thing led to another. So, would you not like to know a little bit about my characters? Or?
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. And why I wrote this, my great uncle, Richard Bradley, was the first Commodore of the Carolina Yacht Club. You've been there. I know John's been there. And he was a founder, frankly, of it, and he loved to sail. And so he had brothers-in-law and brothers and cousins, all men, and 7 of them founded the yacht club, and it was the first building on Wrightsville Beach. And they founded it because storms would come, and they needed shelter. And also because they wanted, they're sailing along, and you need to drink a little bit here and there. And if you're a little bit tipsy, you want to sober up before you go home. So they would have a place where they could kind of sober up. And the yacht club went from a little building like that. It's the second oldest yacht club in America. And it went to what it is today, which is the most wonderful place I've ever been. And I love it. I feel just blessed to be able to go there because it's been passed down in generations. And a lot of people think you have to be rich to go on that. And most of the people, oh please, if you're a member, don't get mad at me, but most of the people there are kind of land poor. you know what I mean. They get in because they're born in, but it's not because they're rich, most of them. So I've had a guilt complex. I love it. I love the place. But I've had a guilt complex because I'm an activist, human rights activist. Y'all know that. And it was bothering me that it was all white. All white folks. There were some black folks in the kitchen. They worked in the kitchen. They don't anymore because civil rights came in and they quit doing that. So now we have some Hispanics. We also have young people who now college age who do that. Why didn't I reconcile this conflict, this moral conflict? I wasn't going to do like Cy and resign my membership because he worked on the newspaper and he felt it was wrong. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not going to do that because I love the place. So I decided, hey, I want to write a book about and I call it by a different name. It isn't the Carolina Yacht. It's a different yacht club, but sort of kind of like it. And so a lot of people wonder about these places that are private and what do people do? And so I thought, well, I'm just going to tell them. I'm going to give you a portrait of what it's like. Peggy's a member. She knows, what it's like, the inside poop on the yacht club. And while doing that, I was going to work through some issues I had with it. And Ben had said something in the little article he wrote about this book. And thank you, Ben. It is really, I write from the male point of view. I'm fascinated by men. I've never figured them out. I keep trying, and I try to get into their brains. I don't mean to stereotype, but to figure, what's it like to be a guy and think of what they deal with, and particularly my age, men of my age, which is of a certain generation, because the world has changed. Just in the past 20 years, I had future shock myself because I can't work a techno gadget to save my life. I don't own a cell phone, never have, never will. And I've never Twittered or tweeted or tuckered or whatever it is that they do. What's changed? Well, straight white men don't run the world anymore. Well, they may run it, but it's fast changing, as a lot of the certain political party knows. Things with women are changing. Their relationships, we women kind of have a little different attitude now, right? Yeah, came out of the closet like Nora. So this wonderful man who's a retired judge, member of the aristocracy, born to the purple, who's a former commodore of the yacht club, as he's in retirement and he meets Wyndham from California, begins to realize there's a lot more world right here than he's ever known. And he begins to explore it. And in exploring it, something happens at the yacht. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
No. Did you choose the name of Nora as a kind of relationship to Nora and the Doll's House?
That's an excellent question. I think also, was James Joyce, didn't he have a Nora in his life? Was
Nora
that-
Barnacle was Mrs.
Yeah.
The one who made a man out of him on the day which became
Absolutely. I think that Nora, there's something about the name Nora which has stuck with me subconsciously, but I didn't consciously choose it for that.
Did you like to watch all Thin Man movies?
Oh yeah, oh you're right.
Nick and Nora.
No, yeah, Nick and Nora. See? Excellent question. Because I didn't consciously choose it. It just sort of said, hi, I'm going to be Nora.
But they both broke out of their molds.
Yeah. So,
More questions?
come on, you guys.
Oh, they're thinking, do you have a passage you like?
Oh, in here?
Yeah.
I do. Let me see if I can get one for public consumption. Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, that brings up a sequel. I didn't know how this was going to end. I knew part of the ending, where I was direct going, and it happened. But I didn't really know what was going to happen to Dan. And a lot of people mad at me for what happened to Dan. But it just had to happen. As I wrote this, it had to happen. And toward the end of the book, an Episcopal minister makes his appearance, who's about Dan's age. And he's been in the ministry for eons. And like Dan has been sort of plodding along as a judge in your life and not questioning much of anything. This minister has been doing the same thing. I think they call them priests now in the Episcopal Church. For me, it's minister because I think a priest is Catholic. And this minister appears in the book and has a conversation with Dan. Dan goes to him because he's somewhat troubled about his marriage and so on. And the minister's name is Chris. Okay. Dan says, this is after the service, and he goes up in the office of the minister. And Dan, he's got to talk to you. He says, the thing with my wife, Nora, it's not her fault. She would have continued with me if I required it of her, but what's the point when passion has long fled? And Chris, the minister, says, well, church policy on sexuality is loosened up. It does use the words exclusive, committed relationship, however, which precludes seeking solace elsewhere when you're legally married. Fuck that! Dan shocked himself when he slipped into street talk. He was fed up with the hypocritical mores of polite, God-fearing society. And I didn't put this in the book, but I want to mention something. How many of you know Bertrand Russell's work? And I'm not related to him. I wish I were, but he's one man I wish I could have slept with. I'm sorry, honey. He's a brilliant man. And he
Kind of
wrote,
short and skinny.
well, I don't care. It's the mind I go for, honey. You just turn off the light on the other stuff. But I like the mind, does it for me. He wrote a collection of essays called Why I Am Not a Christian.
Oh, yeah.
And the last one is called Nice People. You got to read that thing. You can Google it and read it. Anyway, go back to God-fearing society. Wyndham was right. Sex was about wanting, Wyndham is the California girl, sex was about wanting to give and receive love with another person, not about rules and regulations. Laws were designed to exercise authority and control, not to be humane. I want to rescind my confession, he said. Do you have a nullification ritual in that prayer book? Rescind, nullify, jargon, because he realized he's been speaking in legal jargon all his life. I'll tell you something, but don't quote me, said Chris. Go for it. I believe that the judgment seat of compassionate God will understand without love, life can be dust in the mouth. And then Chris put away his scotch bottle and wiped that, he keeps it in a drawer at his desk in his office, and wiped. Any Episcopalians in here? You know, people have called them whiskey-payans for a reason. He wiped out both glasses with a handkerchief. Get rid of the evidence, he joked, switching off the light. And this lays the groundwork for the sequel. I didn't know I was going to write a sequel. I'm writing the sequel now. But Chris and Wyndham kind of took over towards the end. And so the sequel is called The Reluctant Priest. The Reluctant Priest. And it's about Chris Brad. Any other questions?
Is she?
She continues in the book, but you'll have to know what happens toward it. I don't want to give that away.
Question in back.
In writing this, did you find that yourself you were trying to get to some of the issues that you know about yourself, or were hoping to find out about yourself?
Absolutely.
Proclivities, let's say, about
Stuff.
Risque stuff, that you want to expose.
Oh, you want risque stuff. I had fairly well coped with myself. I'm of a certain age, and I've been around the block a few times, John, and I had kind of dealt with a lot of stuff and freed myself from a lot of it. But I dealt with some ethical issues in dealing with Dan. And I dealt with my own sort of future shock experience in recent years. I had attitudes about certain things, and I've changed some of my attitudes through writing this. And I came to know here about 10 years ago, I began going to the gay church downtown. It was on Castle Street. It's moved now. And I went because, quite honestly, most of the ministers I've ever listened to in the pulpit bore me stiff. And there was this incredible female lesbian minister named Amanda. She was from England. She was gorgeous. I had her to the yacht club for dinner one night. She had long dark hair and blue eyes, and it was so smart, and she gave these wonderful sermons. And she said she wanted to begin to mainstream the church. She didn't want it just identified as a gay church, the Metropolitan something or other church, but she wanted straight people to come. I said, okay, I'm bored over here at the Episcopal Church. I'm going to come to yours. Boy, was that an eye-opener. Boy, did I change my attitudes. Boy, did I experience things. Then I had a student at UNCW who wanted me to come to her black church. And I had always heard, and most Southerners do, that, man, if you want to go to a lively church service, the heck with the white services, go to a black church service. you get your money's worth. Well, I went to her church, and boy, are they right. And that opened me up. So all of that kind of material kind of went into here, John. And as I was writing it, I was dealing, and I've got, if we had more time, I'd read you a passage which I think you would, about the service at the Black Church, which I think you find interesting. And it is a real one right here in town, because I went there to it.
Any more questions? Well, thank you, Anne. I think she can hang around for a few minutes, talk to you individually. You've got copies over here for sale. We have popcorn, watermelon, and frozen M&Ms in the back. So thank y'all for being here.
Give a hand for Ben, because we all...
Next week we're having a bit of a change of gears. Our speaker will be Rebecca Petrick, another UNCW MFA. She's the author of the young adult novel Steering Toward Normal, which starts off with a young man in rural Minnesota raising his steer for his 4-H project. In the course of things, you might like this, Anne. He happens to find out that his best friend is also the half-brother he never knew about.
Oh, interesting how life works out.
Anyway, Rebecca said she's going to bring some 4-H livestock with her.
Oh, wow!
Yeah, when she had an event over at Pomegranate, she actually brought a steer. They tied it up outside, so I don't know what she's going to walk in here. So this is another good reason for you to come on the second Monday in September. Thank y'all very much for coming. Have a good evening.
Get some popcorn.
Oh, wow.
I want that shirt.